Hi, my name is Surya and welcome to my little episode of Quilting in Your PJs. I've got my trusty IKEA bathrobe on this morning and I am ready to get down to some free motion quilting. Now, free motion quilting is a lot of fun. I love free motion quilting. There are just a few little things that we're going to have to look at together here to keep us from breaking down and crying. You know, it can get frustrating if you don't, know some of the little tricks that can keep you out of hot water here. So let's go to the machine and I'll show you some free motion quilting. Now, actually before I take you to the machine, I'm going to show you a couple things that I did first here. These are mini quilt sandwiches. What you want to do is take your scraps of fabric and your backing and your batting, put them together into a little sandwich, that you can practice on to get the feel of free motion quilting. Once you get some ideas down, what you want to put on your quilt, you want to then, move on to your big quilt. The one thing is, there's a big difference between quilting one of these nifty little practice sandwiches and getting a king-size quilt under your sewing machine. That's a whole other deal. Once you get the monster under your sewing machine, you're going to be dealing with what's called drag. And drag is just that. It's a drag. From all directions, the weight of your quilt is going to want to pull against your hands and your fabric and completely mess up, these cute little designs that you've conceived. Translating this to your big quilt is a whole other deal. And once you learn the little tricks, you'll be able to do that. Okay, so here are the free motion basics for you. This is a gliding mat. I highly recommend one of these. It helps your quilt glide and slide along the surface very easily, or more easily, I should say. This is your extension table. Make sure you put an extension table on the machine. That will help quite a bit. Lower the feed dogs before you start quilting. Make sure your stitch length is on 0. And make sure you're using a darning foot. Now the other thing is you want your tension to be set a little above normal. If you see that the loops are forming on the bottom of the quilt, then go ahead and raise your tension up a little bit more still. If you see loops are forming on the top, if you're seeing bobbin thread coming up into the top of your quilt, go just lower your tension a little bit to adjust that. Okay? So I've got my little quilt sandwich here that I made. And, like I say, it's easier to quilt on one of these than it is a big king-size quilt, but it's a good thing to do, even if you're experienced, before you start your quilt, because it's a good warm-up, and it will get you into the motion of the free motion. Alright, before you start quilting, you want to pull the bobbin thread up through all the layers of fabric. Pull it up just like when you're doing your regular sewing, except you want to pull it all the way up through the fabric. You just don't want it hanging out on the bottom of the quilt underneath there where it can get tangled up again in the machine or make a mess on the bottom of your quilt. So what I like to do is I like to start with my needle in the down position and set my machine so it always stops in the down position. And I'm just going to start out slow, and I have my speed on a mid-speed. And I'm going to go with nice, smooth, easy movements. timing my movements with the speed of the machine. Okay, so what I'm doing here is called stippling, and this is used to fill in large portions of a quilt. So we can also change up our stippling a little bit and do something a little fancier. Add a little bit more interest to it. The other thing you can do is you can echo your designs, and that's just following the same line but just a little bit outside of it, usually about 1/4 of an inch away. So echoing is another fun thing you can do on your quilt. Let's see, if you go too fast, and if you make the machine go too fast and you move your fabric too slow, you're going to get a million tiny stitches that will take you forever to take out. It will be like doing surgery, and it's no fun to take stitching out of your quilt. You might have to do it now and again, but you don't want them to be very tiny like that. Okay, so on the other end of the spectrum, if you're going too slow and you're moving your fabric too fast, oh my god, well, I'm exaggerating quite a bit, but you can see you get really gigantic stitches, and you're usually not going to want something like that on your quilt. So it's a matter of getting the right speed of the machine, time it with, the right speed of your hands. Alright, I love my sewing machine, but let's look up above it for a minute here. I like my camera too, it's fun. Okay, here are some clips that I bought at the 99-cent store for, guess what the price was, and they are really handy. They're just, these little utility clips, and I made sure I got the ones with the little soft, clamps on them so I wouldn't hurt my quilt, and what I do is, there's the other set of them hanging up there, you can kind of see. So, I hung up 2 sets of these quilts, or clips, on clothesline, and see what they are attached to here. I got 2 little hooks that I screwed into the wall there, and those are going to help me hang up my quilt while I'm quilting, and that's going to help eliminate some of the drag of the quilt. But I will say it helps a lot because I've got limited space, and if you have limited space, I highly recommend hanging up your quilt like this, behind the machine, and that will eliminate a lot of the drag. So seriously think about doing that. Alright, what was I going to say? Oh yeah, so I did my suspension system. Love it. Sort of. Thank God it's there. Your other option, other than suspending your quilt behind the machine, is to just get a big long table and put it behind your machine. and that will eliminate a lot of the drag while you're trying to quilt. If you don't do something to eliminate the drag, you're going to have a real hard time, especially with the bigger quilts. You know, you're making a little placemat or a little table runner. Free motion quilting is a breeze, no problem. Once you get these big guys under there, you're going to need to have some strategy going, trust me. So suspend the quilt, put a big table behind the quilt, you know, or you can spend, you know, $10,000 and get a big quilting frame and a carriage for your machine or a big long arm machine. And you can go that route, and I would love to do that, but, you know, most of us aren't on that kind of a budget, you know, especially if we're not going to make a lot of quilts. So, 99-cent store, best way to go. You know, okay, so that's one thing. Now let's get on to the actual quilting. We'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, so the first tool you might think about using when you free motion quilt are your bare hands. Now, you have a lot of freedom, you know, with your bare hands. You can, you know, reach up and pick up other tools and, you know, take out the pins from your quilt and, you know, without having to fuss with taking gloves off your hands. So when you free motion quilt with just your bare hands, though, it's kind of hard to grip the fabric. It's kind of hard to keep good traction on your fabric. Your hands will get fatigued. You'll start kind of clenching your knuckles, putting pressure down on your wrists. You're going to feel it in your shoulders, and you'll get pretty sore pretty quick. At least that's what I found. You know, maybe if you're just doing a little table runner or something without a lot of drag, you'll be fine, but I found I needed some help. So, you know, one thing I tried was I tried this, one of these fabric guides. They're like little hoops, and there's a little rubber grip underneath the entire hoop. And that thing, it grips your fabric. You know, you put it on there and you kind of drive it like a little car, you know, and it's supposed to hold onto your fabric and keep it, you know, stretched out flat. And I tried it and I kind of hated it. Unfortunately, I'm sending mine back, and because it would all of a sudden slip. You know, you'd be getting good traction, and then all of a sudden it would just slip, or it kept bumping into the works of the machine. And I didn't want to ruin my $1,500 sewing machine. The other thing you can do, and this is my default, this is what I go back to every time. I have a cheap dish glove from the supermarket on my right hand, you know, and I suppose I could put one on my left hand too, but I happen to have this funny little nubbly glove with good grippers that goes on my left hand real easy. And I use that one on my left hand, and I get great traction. You know, I can grip the fabric real well and move it all around. You know, it's my best tool. I have ultimate control. You know, I can stretch the fabric and do whatever I need to do. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is building what I call my little fort here. It's a fort with the fabric all around your area where you're going to be quilting. You kind of want to eliminate the drag on the fabric by building up this little fort. That way you can draw from it. See how much easier that moves? Because I've got a lot of slack all around here on all sides. Before I start quilting, I want to check that I can move my fabric in every direction without it hanging up. Now look, if I hang the weight of that quilt off to the side here, it's harder to move. It's dragging on me. And I'm not going to get pretty stitches doing that. I'm going to get something that looks really bad. So build your fort. There you go. And quilt with ease. Okay, now you can see I've got all my clips in here now. I have my quilt suspended all from behind here with my handy clips on the clothesline there. And this is a king-size quilt I'm making. So that said, there is a lot of weight to fight on this quilt, and I do find these clips to be very helpful. I highly recommend it. Or like I say, get a big long table, you know, behind your sewing machine. But if you don't have room for the big long table, hang up some clips. You'll be grateful you did that. All right, so what do you do with what's hanging down in front of the machine? What do you know, you've got some weight here, you know, and you can't clip it up, you know, because you've got to sit here in front of your machine. So what are you going to do to manage all this bulk that's going to be trying to drag against you? Well, okay, the first thing you can do is, you know, just put it in your lap, you know, and so long as you build your fort up here every few minutes, you'll be fine. You can move your fabric around just fine, you know. Now the other thing you can do is if you have a lot of bulk here, now see I'm getting towards the edge of my quilt. That's the sweet spot because you don't have lots of bulk inside your the throat of your machine here. That's sweet because, you know, you've got a lot more room to move your hands here, a lot more freedom. But when you're in the middle of your quilt, this is going to be all bunched up in here. You're going to have a big wad of fabric, a lot of bulk in here, and not quite as much room to quilt. You're going to have to deal with that. Okay? And, you know, to do that, one thing you're going to have to remember, there's not as much room. You're going to have to make shorter movements before you stop doing what you're doing. Or, I mean, before you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to have to stop. Make a short movement, get just a little bit of quilting done. Stop. Hold your hands there. Don't move your hands. You know, carefully move one away and readjust your fabric. Get your fort readjusted and keep quilting. So, that's one thing you can do. The other thing is you're going to lay it up over your shoulder here. There's going to be, you know, a big wad of fabric here. Lay it up over your shoulder, you know, that's another way to handle it. I find that with suspending it from behind, this stuff isn't up on my shoulder as much. It really helps to have that other half taken care of there. But you can put it up on your shoulder. You can squash it between your chin. Not the best thing for ergonomics, and you'll get a neck ache after a while. But in a pinch, you know, you do what you have to do. And let's see, what else can I tell you? Oh yeah, so there are going to be times when you're free motion quilting that you're moving along and you want to keep going. You've got your design in your mind and you're feeling inspired and you're moving along, but you hit some drag and it's going to start pulling against you. And if you keep going, if you stay headstrong and say, I'm going to finish my design no matter what, I'm feeling inspired, I'm going to complete this beautiful, butterfly stencil that I've got under there or whatever, well, guess what? That headstrongness is going to mess you up. It's like when you're trying to get, you have a great idea in your mind and you're trying to communicate it to a friend who keeps interrupting you. Well, guess what? This process is going to keep interrupting you. And you're going to have to learn to be patient and stop and readjust and then get on with whatever your thought was and keep going, So just kind of think of, your machine and your big giant wad of quilt as being that friend who's going to keep interrupting you, and you just got to practice patience with your friends. So learn to stop, give it a moment, reevaluate where the drag is coming from. Is it coming from behind? Do I need to build my fort up more here on the side or in front? And then continue to get on with your free motion quilting. The other thing is the speed of your foot pedal. Let me show you something about the foot pedal. Machine's not on right now, but I've got a bunch of other cords under here. Watch other cords, because if they get wedged up under your foot pedal, you're going to be quilting and you say, oh, why isn't my machine going? Or why is it going so slow? Well, maybe it's stuck on a cord. That happens to me a lot. The other thing is, if I'm quilting along and I accidentally get lead foot, and my machine's going at such a high speed that I can hardly keep up with the quilting, I need to learn to stop. If you get lead foot and the machine is going really fast, stop. Don't feel like you have to keep up. I get this thing, and it's like Lucy at the chocolate factory. She's trying to keep up with the assembly line, and it's going faster and faster, and she's stuffing all the chocolates into her hat. So again, you're in control. All you do, let off the gas, and stop. Reevaluate, where do I want to go next? Readjust your fort on all sides, and then keep going. You'll be a lot happier. Alright, let me shut up and do some real quilting now. And let me find where I'm at on my quilt. Alright, so the first thing you got to do is you got to bring up your bobbin thread. Well, turn on your machine too, I suppose. Alright. So, the bobbin thread's going to be underneath all those layers, and you're going to want control of that. So you want to bring the bobbin thread up to the top. So just like you do when you're, bringing up the bobbin thread normally, you're just going to be bringing it up through all the layers. So, same thing. Just brought it up there, it came up through all the layers. Now I've got both of them up on top, both my top thread and my bobbin thread. And next I'm going to put on my reading glasses, because I can't see for caca unless I have these reading glasses on when I sew now. So I'm going to plant my needle where I want to start. Usually I do it inside one of the seams. That's kind of my little starting off point, my little launching point. Okay, next I'm going to build up my fort. Alright, see, okay, and I'm just going to kind of check to make sure that I've got free movement from every direction. Okay, I'm going to put on my glove. So I'm going to hold my hands down firmly on the fabric. You want to kind of stretch it out, not distort it, but stretch it out to where your patches, your piecing is straight. Now I've got pins in here. I safety pin basted mine. And so when I come to a pin, and when I come near a pin, I want to remove it. If I get too close, it's going to be hard to remove it when it's next to my presser foot. And I want to set this so that my needle is going to stop in the down position. It's telling me my feed dogs are down there. Okay. See, it's stopping in the up position, so I'm going to hold my hand on here. If I remove both hands, when I go to make an adjustment, my fabric might slip a little bit. There's always a little bit of drag, even with all these precautions. Your fabric's going to slip a little bit when you remove your hand, so always keep one hand on there when you make an adjustment. So you put my needle down, so now it's going to stop in the down position for me. And I'm just doing just kind of these wavy, windy looking lines because I'm doing a nature themed quilt here. And what you want to do is just coordinate. See now, because I can't think and talk and do this quite at the same time, so I'm going to stop a lot. What you want to do is coordinate the speed that you're getting from your foot pedal along with the motion of moving your hands so that you get the most even stitch length that you can. Now, in a perfect world, you're going to get a beautiful even stitch length. In the real world, you're going to get some variations. Now, if you don't have a lot of practice, you're going to get a lot of variation in your stitch length. If you have a lot of practice, it's going to get better and better over time. And don't get obsessed with it. Don't go picking out your stitches because, you know, the stitch length is varying a little bit. Don't worry about it. Your quilt's still going to look beautiful. And if you look at some experienced quilters, free motion quilting, you're going to see the variation too. You can buy an expensive stitch regulator for some machines, and that regulates the length of the stitches while you free motion quilt, or at least it tries to. I've seen some of the results and I wasn't all that impressed. I say, you know, just learn to be a lover with your machine, you know, and you'll both get a lovely rhythm together. So just that said, I'm going to keep going for a minute here and just kind of... See, that time I pushed down a little hard, you know, so because it's going faster, I'm going to have to move my hands faster to keep my stitches regulated. So let's try a little more control with the speed there. Oh, too slow. That'll make you crazy too if it goes too slow. You'll see. Alright. Picking up a little bit of speed here. This is looking nice. Hopefully you can see some of the stitches. Alright. Nice. Alright. So, not too bad. Alright, changed my batteries and I'm back. And, you know, let me talk about just a couple other things that you're going to run into. Now, I'm going to put my gloves on here, and while I'm putting those on, I'll explain. When you're quilting along, and like I said, you know, about that friend interrupting you, and you need to stop, you know, before you can finish your thought. So you come to that point, you're going, okay, I'm feeling a little drag coming from the left. I got to stop. You know, or oh, I'm feeling, you know, my right hand is kind of fighting. It's kind of pushing into that big bunch of fabric I've got in my throat here. I better stop and reevaluate, you know, readjust everything. So when you do that, you know, like I say, if you remove both hands, readjust everything, more likely than not, when you start stitching again, and sometimes it won't happen, but most of the time it's going to happen, because there's going to be a little drag from somewhere. Your needle is going to make a jog in the stitches. So when you start again, you're going to get a big jog in the stitches, and it's going to look ugly, and you're not going to like it. Okay, so let's say, let's say I'm too far over to the right. See, this finger's going to get sewn up. So I need to stop. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to carefully take this right hand and kind of walk it finger by finger over, like just kind of one finger at a time, until I can get, you know, where I want to reposition my fingers. And then this one, just walk it over finger by finger. Don't pick up the whole hand, just walk it over. That will keep your needle in the same dead-on position it was in when you stopped. And so when you start again, your line is going to stay smooth. Now, if you do all that and for some reason there's still a little bit of drag and you do get a jog in your stitching, you can do one of two things. You can, if you think that might happen, okay, you do a little safety check. You take one stitch. Now it landed dead on, but if it were to jog and I only took one stitch, I've got a free pass. What I can do is I can just turn my hand wheel up, take that stitch out, line everything up again, and start again with a nice smooth clean line. Or I can just keep going. I can forgive myself and say, okay, there's a stupid little jog in the stitching, you know, work it into the design. 9 times out of 10 it's going to work into the design just fine. So I'm just going to keep going here. Okay, right there, I'm getting a little overwhelmed. I'm like, okay, where do I want to go next? Oh my God. I'm going to stop, chill out, and think about where I want to go next. Okay, let's see. Well, it looks like I want to kind of go down here a little bit. Kind of come back and go in there, curve around there. Oh, stop again, you know. So you're going to stop and start a lot, especially when you're just, you know, if you don't have, you know, a fancy quilting frame and a big long arm machine, you're going to be stopping and starting a lot. No big deal. Now, as you notice, I removed both hands. So when I go back, I'm going to do my little safety check. My little safety check is take one stitch, no more than one stitch. If it goes in 2 stitches, I can't back up unless I pick out my stitches, you know, with the seam ripper. It's no fun to pick out quilting stitches. You know, they're harder to get out. It's like doing surgery, I think, especially if you get little tiny ones. No fun. Okay, so, you know, bare hands here, just for demonstration purposes. You're moving along and you do something you really don't like. Okay, you're like, you know, I know, Surya said, forgive myself, just keep going, you know, it's going to work into the design, but I really hate this. This looks like one of my Aunt Martha's skin tags. It doesn't look like a pretty flower petal. Well, okay, in that case, you know, maybe you want to stop and pick it out, okay? But a lot of the times, you know, look and see, you know, well, maybe this will work into the design. Maybe it won't be so bad. And maybe it, you know, once everything, all the other lines are around it or going through it, it won't look like one of Aunt Martha's skin tags anymore. And nobody's gonna, you know, be upset with you, you know. So anyway, the important thing is that you can, you know, take a step back, look at your quilt and love it. You know, try not to be too critical. You know, we all kind of know if we're kind of not, you know, trying hard enough or whatever, or, you know, you being lazy and, you know, there's something on there that, you know, really could be removed. Go ahead and remove it, you know, but don't get obsessed with picking out every little square inch of your quilt or it's never going to get done. And, you know, the quilting is, it's a beautiful part of your quilt, but it's not all of the quilt. You keep in mind you did a lot of beautiful piecing to get to this place. And, you know, that's, I think, what people are going to look at more, are your colors and your piecing. And anyway, so the next thing that I want to talk about are stencils. Maybe you don't just want to do stippling or wavy abstract lines in your quilt. You know, So you can do a stencil, you know, if you have a special place in your quilt where you want to showcase a little design, you can do stencils. Okay, so here's a spot on my quilt. You know, you can see right here I did a little oak leaf stencil. That was a stencil because I didn't feel confident just freehand drawing that. If there's something, you know, you don't feel confident just freehanding, use a stencil and you'll get the little design. So I wanted to add that little oak leaf there. It's, you know, it's not perfect, but it's nice. The stencil really helps with that. And here's another place where I did a stencil. Again, you know, this would be hard for me to freehand it. There it is. So I wanted to make a little sword fern there. So you can see there's a little sword fern, you know, and I used a stencil for that. You know, it's a little wonky, but I think it's kind of pretty in the context of the quilt, you know. So stencils are fun. Let me show you some more about how to do stencils. Okay, so let me talk about the stencils a little more. Now, this is just a piece of computer paper. You know, what I did was I sketched out a couple of little drawings of what I wanted. These are seashells. And, you know, because there's a part of my quilt, you know, where I want seashells. So, here's my golden threads tissue paper. And I'm just going to cut out a little piece of the tissue paper. You want to cut out a piece big enough, you know, so that you can comfortably pin it onto your quilt too, though. And so you can trace right through this. So I'm going to just trace my seashell design. Alright, so yeah, I guess I will add that other line. Okay. So you just want nice clear lines to follow. That doesn't look great, but demonstration purposes, right? Okay, so you want to cut that out big enough so that you can pin it comfortably onto your quilt. And what you want to do before you put this stencil on your quilt is you want to perforate it, because you want this tissue paper to be easy to tear off. If you don't perforate it, it's going to be a pain in the butt to tear off of your quilt. You're going to be fussing with the tweezers and trying not to pull on your stitches and pull them out of the quilt. So if you just have a little stencil to do and you don't have an extra sewing machine and your quilt is already under the machine and you don't want to pull it out, you know, if it's just a small stencil, you know, one or two, go ahead, just take a pin and well, also like a, you know, put something soft under there, and you can just go along and perforate it just like a sewing machine would. Just poke little pinholes in there. Now that's a little tedious and it's a little time consuming. So like I say, that's only for if you're doing, you know, one or two little stencils. If you're doing a lot of stencils or a big stencil, you know, take the time to do them first, to get them all perforated first. Draw them out, trace them, and then put them under your sewing machine without any thread in there, and just perforate it with a needle, just like your free motion quilting. Then pin it onto your fabric, pin it onto your quilt, and follow the design. Same as you would do any other free motion quilting. Now, when you pin it, you know, it's going to make little bumps in the tissue paper, and I don't find that too big of a problem on a small stencil, but if you have a really nice, fancy, intricate stencil, you don't want to mess it up, use some temporary spray adhesive and put this down. And they also make this little fancy gun thing I saw online. I don't remember what you call it, but you can buy it online. And it shoots out little sticky dots that you can put your stencils down with. So anyway, this is a fun way to go. The Golden Threads tissue paper seems to be the best. The other thing I use, this is a little harder to tear off. I think it's a little thicker and a little more substantial. This is what they make, what they wrap sandwiches in. And I got these at Smart and Final. I got a gigantic box of like 1,000 of them for like, $9.99 or something. And, I've had it forever because I don't have to use that much. I use this mostly for paper piecing. It tears off pretty reasonably when I do paper piecing. But it would be maybe my second choice if I didn't have any of this hanging around and I really needed to add a stencil to my quilt. I could use this. Make sure for sure that you pre-perforate this stuff because it will be fussy to take off. Paper piecing, it's not that hard. Stenciling, it's going to be a little more fussy. So do pre-perforate it under your machine or the tedious route with a little pin there. Okay, so here's that seashell stencil. And when I go to put this under the machine to quilt it, how am I going to quilt that? Well, I'm just going to do regular free motion quilting, right? It's going to be pinned down or adhesive down, temporary spray adhesive, not the permanent stuff. Look at your spray can first there. Okay, so how am I going to do it? I'm going to want to go with the most continuous line I can find. So, stitch, 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 stitch. You're going to have to think up a strategy, stitch, 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 to where you're keeping that line continuous, because what you want to do is avoid having to backtrack over your stitches. So, and there are like continuous line stencils that you can download on the internet or that you can buy in books that have, a continuous line. But I have a feeling that once I get so far on this little seashell, I might have to start backtracking at some point or another. I'm going to get a little confused. So when I reach that point, like I said before, I'm going to stop, think about where I want to go, and if I do have to backtrack over a line, I'm just going to pretend that I walked into the wrong room, oops, sorry, excuse me, and I'm going to slowly and politely back out, and I'm going to go back over those stitches very slowly and carefully, backing out. Just like I'm kind of following my own footprints that I made. Going forward, I'm just going to try to go over those same footprints going backwards. And sometimes you're going to have to do that. Not all your designs that you're going to make up are going to have a continuous perfect quilting pattern that you can do. So keep that in mind. And maybe I'll learn more about stencils myself. I've never used them before. I'm just starting to use them on this quilt. And it's kind of fun because you can, add little pictures and designs along with your freehand, scribbly stuff to your quilt as well, and make it look a little fancier. All right, well, I gotta go eat breakfast. So hopefully I've been of some help today, and I've had a lot of fun free motion quilting, and I'm gonna get some breakfast and continue on here. And if you like the video, do that like thing, and if you like the video, do that subscribe thing too. I like that. And have a great time free motion quilting. Okay, before you start quilting, you want to pull the bobbin thread up through all the layers of fabric. Just like when you're doing regular sewing, except you're pulling it up through all the fabric.